Welcome to Asian Pacific Voices Radio. I'm your host, Rasha Goel. Joining us today is our very special guest, Jing Jing, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Hey, Rasha, how you doing? It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, before we get into a deeper dive into our conversation, let me just tell you a little bit about him. Jing's love of storytelling began on the floor of the library. The only child of immigrants, reading stories was his way of feeling less lonely and learning the ways of America. This love eventually transferred to filmmaking, which he saw as a means to not only entertain others, but also to free those hard to express thoughts and feelings within himself. Jingy kicked off his career during an impromptu trip to China, where odd jobs on set somehow led him to directing commercials for global brands such as Levi's, Johnnie Walker, and Cartier. His commercial and shorts work would then receive recognition at the Cannes Lions, D&AD, and HBO Visionaries. He credits his time in China for giving him the experience and self-knowledge he needed to pursue his ultimate dream of writing and directing narrative work. Now, since returning to the U.S., Jingy has explored both television and film. He was a staff writer on the inaugural season of the BET show Boomerang and directed 2 episodes of its sister show 20s. His original screenplay, Chang Can Dunk, was named to the 2020 Blacklist and was eventually developed as a Disney Plus original. For his directorial work on Chang Can Dunk, Jingy was recently named to Variety's 10 Directors to Watch 2023. With projects for Amazon, Netflix, and others in development, he's passionate about telling intimate personal stories that nevertheless have universal appeal and bringing the marginalized and underdogs of the world to mainstream focus. That is something I'm very passionate about, so I'm so excited to speak to you more about this. What an incredible journey you've had. I'd like to start by asking you, at what point in your life did you know that you wanted to become a filmmaker? And was there an incident or a person that inspired you?
That's a great question. I like to think that I was born to be a filmmaker, but it was also a long journey to get to convincing myself that this is something I could do as a career. I was a very creative child. I love to draw. I love to write little stories. But in middle school and high school, I actually totally changed my focus to more sort of like logical, predictable paths. My parents really wanted me to go. They're very, I wouldn't say they're typical Asian American parents, but they very much had typical hopes and dreams for me, where I would become like a doctor or a professor or something like that. It wasn't until I think I went to NYU where I was studying something totally different. I was a psychology major, and I was lucky enough to take some film courses and also have a lot of friends who were in the film program. And I think being around them, watching the movies that they watched, it really opened my eyes up to the possibilities of myself and what I was really, really passionate about. And once I saw that, like, filmmaking is just, it's like any job, there's a step-by-step thing that you do. There's things that you can learn. It's not just something that you summon out of your pure will or talent. I realized that it could be something that I could do. And I think I've just taken little moments. I went to film school for a little bit, but I also had various little experiences on set that added to my confidence and my self identity. And here I am today.
I love that. I can relate to the whole thing about going into medicine because I was supposed to be a pharmacist. Was there ever a moment of what if for you? Because I feel like sometimes when we come into this industry, right, especially if there's preconceived notions of what we should do logically, there's that thing of, well, what if this doesn't work out? But I'm so passionate about this. Was there that moment for you, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah. The whole time. Especially when you first get into it, there's so many possibilities. There's so much risk, and because a lot of us come from immigrant backgrounds. We don't really have a model to look after. But what actually really helped me was learning more in depth about like about story structure, and if you study like three act structure and you study story, what an actual protagonist is and what a hero is, they have to go on a journey, and that journey is always uncertain. It's what makes them a hero. It's what makes them, it's what makes what they're doing powerful, because they are taking on a risk. And so there's always been a sort of self-reflective, and you can see this in my film. There's always been a sort of self-reflective aspect of like what I'm doing is also inspiring me doing the thing, and I like to say that like my movie is about a young kid trying to dunk a basketball, but really, I think what I was trying to express was, can I be a filmmaker or not? Can I make a movie or not? The movie, making a movie was my version of Chang's dunk, basically. And so I used the risk, I used the fear of failure to keep me going, basically.
That is so interesting. I feel like you hit the personal and professional point on that, especially with this film. Let's talk about Chain Can Dunk. What was the inspiration? What was your deeper message for audiences with this film? What'd you enjoy about it?
I mean, I think it came from a lot of places. I grew up watching. I I was one of those kids that would, wear down a VHS, watching it 20 times. And I love like those coming of age sports films where like this underdog person or team kind of like finds a coach and then finds something within themselves to be great. I love Mighty Ducks, Little Giants, Karate Kid. There's so many Cool Runnings. But I always remember when I would watch those, I really wanted to see a version of myself, someone who looked like me, be one of the protagonists. And even though I related to the heroes very much, there were certain aspects, like especially the family aspect, that was very different from me. And I always thought, I wish that could happen to me. And growing up a little bit older, I realized that a lot of times it's the perspective, it's who's telling the story that's important. And so I've always set out to tell stories for almost like a younger version of myself. Stories films that would have meant a lot to a younger version of myself. At the same time, I was looking for something. At the same time, I think like there's a lot of images swirling in my head. Like I usually start from a single image that stays with me for a long time. And I'm a big basketball fan, and there was this scene. This is the first scene that I came up with that's still in the film, and it was basically a young kid, and it's snowing, very cinematic, and he's just trying to dunk, and he's doing it over and over and over again, and he can't do it, and that just really stuck with me. And I think I took it as a challenge of like, can I make audiences care about this kid? Because like dunking is like really cool, but it's not the most dramatic thing that can happen in a film. Especially like if you go to the theaters, like every film, the world is ending. You know what I mean? So like, can I make audiences care about this small thing just because this kid cares about it? And so for whatever reason, that idea stuck with me. And when I started pitching it, I realized that there's a deeper underlying message that I think resonated with a lot of people, which is, we're all afraid. It's kind of like what you were saying earlier. We're all afraid we all have certain goals, and it could be big or small. It could be career related, or it could be like something as simple like I want to juggle, and a lot of times we don't even try. We kind of talk ourselves out of it. And I think, life becomes so much more amazing when you do try, and you do see how far you can go, even with like silly things, right? And there was something really, I think that message was really resonant. And so the more I pitched it, the more people were interested. And, I wrote it, and then Disney was like, yeah, this is dope. We'll make it.
Not a bad place to be. Well, and I wanted to talk to you about that process because, I think it's incredible to get a film like this, especially that is geared towards families, towards children. What was the process of writing this and then getting it out to a place like Disney to pick it up? I mean, were there multiple pitches? How does that entire process work?
when you're telling a story, you you have to be honest. Otherwise, the audience will sort of feel this distance with your work, with what you're saying. It'll feel artificial to them, and then they won't be able to feel it in their heart. You know, we all feel this when we watch a really powerful film, and it really just cuts to the core of us. At the same time, you want your film to have a result. You want your film to have an impact. But a lot of times, when you think too much about the impact that you want to have, it gets in the way of you being honest. So I think that, like, as a filmmaker, it's really about balancing that. You want to represent your entire community, but sometimes when you do that, you dilute your own unique voice. You know, and I find that to be quite challenging sometimes. You know, especially when like there's a conversation of like breaking stereotypes. You know, I think that, like, when you think about breaking stereotypes, it's like, what are we actually trying to do? Whose mind are we actually trying to change? And you know, if we're focused on changing that kind of person's perspective, then are we actually ignoring sort of our own community's needs, right? Um, I think that conversation is worth a little bit more analysis. You know, it's like, if you think if Asian men are always emasculated in media, well, why don't we put some like super hot Asian men on screen? But that doesn't always make for the best story or the most interesting story. Like, that's just sort of a surface level thing. You have to put a story behind that. At least from my perspective. I know not everyone agrees with that. And and you know, I think that's what I try to do with Chang. And I think that the most important thing is, for me, in terms of representation, is that the main character, if we just sort of put ourselves as the main character and we give them a full arc, it doesn't really matter what kind of story we put out, because that will be, and we're honest, that will be always a great piece of representation that I think people will relate to. I have to say that I am extremely fortunate in the process on this one. You know, like, there's very, very different pathways to a project getting made, and some can take a decade and some can be very quick. So mine, there was sort of like there was like a series of dominoes that allowed the project to get made in a relatively short period of time. Um, Firstly, I have to shout out my producers. I work with two companies called Make Ready and Hillman Grad. Hillman Grad is Leland Waite's company. She won an Emmy for writing Master of None. Make Ready is run by this guy named Brad Weston, who's like, won Oscars for like The Revenant. And they were very early supporters of me having read writing that I'd done before. And I had another project with them that didn't work out, but they heard this pitch and they wanted to support me. So I wrote the script for them, and then as a team, we took it out to to all of the platforms. Netflix. I actually originally wrote this as sort of like a PG-13. It was a raunchier version of the script, and I was actually aiming it for Netflix because Netflix was making a lot of the YA stuff at the time. But in the end, it was Disney that showed the most interest. And when I thought about the film some more, I realized that I was actually pulling from all my memories growing up, watching these sort of like Disney classics and putting my spin on it. And so it just felt like the best home. And usually when you go to a studio, you can develop for a long period of time. But I think the circumstances of, one, the size of my film was pretty small for them, and also just the timing of like how their other films were shaping up. They wanted to shoot within a year, and so the development process was really short. We sold to Disney in 2021. In 2020, and then we started pre-production in 2021, basically a year later. So that's a really short period of time for development, and like that is like sort of like the ideal smooth sailing, pitch to script to studio. Yeah, yeah. So I'm very, very fortunate on the process on this one. Yes.
Jingy, you know what came to my mind as you were talking is that I'm really excited that it is on that Disney Plus got this project, because For example, I have a nephew who's half Korean, half Indian. He's obsessed with basketball, and he's one of the top players right now on his teams. And I think that for kids that he's 9, but for kids at that age, right, as Asian American kids, to see that there's a potential, that there is something I can do. I feel like I just think I find that more inspiring because yes, when you get into junior high and you get into high school, there are opportunities, but imagine the impact that it's having for younger children at the age of 6 or 7 to know, hey, I can play this too. It doesn't matter what my background is or where I come from. So yeah, that was coming to my mind as you were speaking about just it being on Disney Plus. I'd love to talk to you and I hate categorizing us sometimes as, oh, we're the Asian American creatives or the Asian American filmmakers. But the reality is for those of us who are in this industry is that there are challenges when we come from these marginalized communities. Could you talk about maybe some of the challenges that you have had to face before or after productions that you've been a part of, or even for this film?
I mean, there are definitely a lot of challenges. I mean, as soon as you start, you notice it can be, and the film kind of is about this, where sometimes it doesn't even need to be said. You don't need, you know what I mean? Like it's the whole conversation about like microaggressions versus like, people just understanding where you're coming from. If you, I'll speak specifically in terms of like the making of this project. Like I wrote this project, I'm the director. In a way, like when I step on set, I'm the boss. But even though that was the case for me, um, I I felt very alone oftentimes in the process uh, because I didn't really feel like people understood the sort of nuances of the script and the sort of nuances of the character. And in a way, like when you step on a set and you're the only Asian face there, even though you're making a story about an Asian American family, it can feel very, very isolating. So in a way, like I had a very strong connection with my lead, Bloom Lee, because a lot of times it felt like only we kind of understood exactly what we were doing here and why these scenes were powerful, even though they felt like very, very familiar scenes. Like I remember on the second day we were shooting, there's a scene where Bloom is or Chang is getting coached, and I had to take a moment because I was like, I've never seen someone give the time of day to like a young Asian kid, Asian guy before in a movie before. Like someone say, "You're worth my time. I'm going to train you." And you know what I'm saying? Like I had never seen that scene before, and I was like, "That's really that." It meant a lot for me to be able to do that, but it was also a little painful because I'm like, I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting to see something like this for years and years. You know what I mean? And I guess I have to be the one to do it, and that's like from a creative aspect, like it's challenging to be first because there's a lot of pressure on you to represent, to get it right. You have to contend with the fact that you're the least experienced. There's a pressure of like we have to be perfect, we can't mess up, because if we mess up then we're not going to get another chance. There's that feeling. It all stacks up on top of you because I think especially when you're a creative, it's about being safe enough to play, because when we're playing, that's when we're most creative, we're coming up with the best ideas. But you have all this pressure to perform, which is the opposite, and then you tighten up, and then the product isn't as good. And so it was really interesting because I was feeling all these things, but the movie's about this. You know what I mean? The movie's about this kid who's like, he says he thinks he's just going to train hard and then he's going to be able to dunk. But there's sort of deeper questions at hand. And then, in terms of the industry, I mean, that I'm pretty sure most people are, aware of the various challenges, the fact that we don't have the sort of like old boy network to lean on, and all that stuff. But I would say that like for me, I think the most important thing is your own. When you look in the mirror, how do you feel about yourself as a creative, and how do you see your work? And if you can focus on that, I think I think those sort of external challenges um, can seem less daunting. And that's why I give Kobe a big shout out in the film, because I think he was a real big proponent of that. Bruce Lee as well. Those people that sort of like are all about self knowledge and self understanding. Because once you can conquer your own fears, I think those sort of external challenges become less imposing.
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's the balance, though. Like you said, it's finding that balance between those two perspectives. For Chang and Dunk, I did want to also ask you the casting process for you. Did you want to find an actor as the lead, or were you looking for just a regular kid out there who could come in and you could mold to be, to play this character? What was the casting process like for you?
I wanted to use an actor from the very beginning, just because there's actually when you're making a studio film, there's a lot of pressure on the lead. You can't just like to be the lead of a film, especially a studio film, is there's a lot of pressure. You have to deliver, and you deliver day in, day out, and that's what a professional actor does. I think sometimes there's misconceptions because we hear stories about, oh, this is the first time this person's been on screen, et cetera, and they were amazing. But when you walk on set and there's 200 people and it's like chaotic, and then all of a sudden it stops and the camera and lights are on you, you need a person who can sort of hold the camera's attention in that moment. And so, that said, we opened up to sort of like actors first, and basically like casting process in Hollywood works this way, which is you have a casting director, and then they have a network of actors that they already know, or sort of like representatives who have actors in their stable, and then they send in tapes, and we look at that, and hopefully we pick from that first group. Um, Now, if you can't find someone, then you sort of open it up to: do we look in theater? Do we look sort of like more local? Do we try to do street casting? Find some people that are undiscovered. And with Chang, the main character, the casting process was very dependent on him because what I learned when you're casting a high school project is that you have to cast the lead first, because oftentimes you cast a little bit older, um, just because this is like a producing thing. But like when you cast someone who's under 18, it's totally different shooting rules. You basically have to shoot 1.5 times longer, which is basically inflating your cost by almost double. So a lot of times they shoot older, and then depending on who they cast as the lead, you need to cast a love interest or a best friend that matches them in sort of their age, sort of like look. So for example, Riverdale looks a lot older than maybe like a 13 Reasons Why, you know. And so we had to cast Chang first, and that was actually really, really hard because Chang has a lot of requirements beyond being a great actor. He has to play basketball. He has to be a certain height. He has to, he has to do a lot. And we actually eventually did open it up to non-actors. And there was a kid who came in who was really, really good for not having acted. His last name was literally Chang, which is also funny. And in the end, we went with Bloom, who's a very experienced actor, but he hasn't really, been given too many opportunities yet. And as anyone who watches the film can see, he absolutely killed it.
Oh, well, that should be fun. Okay, so you've got your hands full on that. We have just a few minutes here. I would love to get your thoughts on, coming back to the AAPI community. And we've seen so many incredible creatives, filmmakers, actors. We're getting a lot more opportunities. Do you feel that there is greater change happening to actually create change, or are we still just checking off the boxes, and making sure? What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm torn between those, to be honest with you.
If I'm being totally honest, I think that we're actually right where we should be, and I think we're doing great. And the way I look at it is sort of from a very logical demographic point of view, which is, when I look around at my peers, a lot of my friends had immigrant parents, and our immigrant parents, it was really going to be hard for them to break into Hollywood, and become writers and directors. But they raised, a generation, a second generation that grew up, late '90s, early 2000s, and we, to be leaders in our industries, we need to put in the time, we need to get the experience, we need to make the right connections. It takes a certain amount of time. If you, there's that 10,000 hour theory, right? And what I believe in looking at my own life is, we needed 10 years to get to not only get the right opportunity, but to be ready for the right opportunity. And I think what you're going to see in the next 5 years is a lot of people coming up on those 10,000 hours. And suddenly it's going to be sort of a deluge of talent and projects. I mean, just look at this year. I mean, I can name off like not just like projects, but like pretty significant projects. I mean, Beef just came out on Netflix. You have Joyride. You have Everything Everywhere winning all the Oscars. I mean, like if you look at just like Asian American, I mean, Chloe Zhao. It was like Chloe Zhao, Boon Jung Ho, now Daniel Kwan. I mean, that's three Asian directors winning Best Director in the last 4 years. So I'm not really surprised by that because um, I really do think that like there's going to be a certain like a sudden burst of talent, and that's because of sort of like the history of a big chunk of our community, which is our parents were immigrants. We needed to put in our time. Our time has been put in, and we're about to cash in. So I'm very, very optimistic. There's still challenges, obviously, and there's still pushback, but I think our community is actually doing really, really well, at least in the field that I'm in, entertainment.
No, I'm excited to hear your input on this, and I'm excited even for the remainder of this year and how we see things evolve. All right, before I let you go, I'm going to have to ask you, what is your favorite film to date and why?
Um, I'm like torn between two, and these were like the seminal films. These are like the seminal films that I watched at NYU. One is In the Moon for Love, which everyone became super familiar with the last 2 years, Wong Kar-wai classic, and the other is Thin Red Line, which was a World War II film by Terrence Malick that came out the same year as Saving Private Ryan. Everyone watched Saving Private Ryan. No one watched Thin Red Line, but a Thin Red Line is an absolutely gorgeous film that really touches my soul every time I watch it. And so, if your audience members haven't seen that film, check it out.
And you know what? I find you so inspiring. And even through this conversation, you said that we didn't originally have people to look up to, but now we have people like yourself that other aspiring filmmakers can look up to. So, what piece of advice would you offer?
I would say double down. I would say double down. I mean, that's kind of the point of my movie is like, that thing that you're afraid of. Create some stakes for yourself, and make sure that you at least try. And when you try as hard as you can and see how far you can get. And when you do that, I don't want to give it away, but my movie ends a certain way, right? And uh, the point is that when you really put yourself on that journey where you can't go backwards, it doesn't even matter where you end up because you'll have done something that you'll always be proud of. And for you to have that for yourself, for you to have that relationship with yourself is everything. And I think that's a mindset that I learned along my journey, but it's also very much responsible for, the opportunities that I've created for myself and the people I've met and, the various degrees of success that I've had.
What do you have lined up next? Is there anything you want to share with us that you're working on or that's in the pipeline right now?
Yeah, I mean, the reception to the film has been really good, and it's opened a lot of doors. And so right now, I'm reading some scripts. I'm also developing an original idea. The thing that is probably furthest along is I have another basketball project with Netflix, the TV show called Madness, and it kind of takes place in the crazy world of the best high school basketball players. Which, if you know that world, it's like basically being a 16-year-old, but also being a celebrity um, at the same time. It's very intense. It's very intense. And if you know anything about that world, the last 2 years, the legislation has changed. So now these kids can make money off their fame, which has sort of opened this door up for like a lot of crazy antics. So it's kind of like an Entourage meets Friday Night Lights in the high school basketball world.
This has been so inspirational, and I'm so happy we had the opportunity to talk. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and yes, and everything that you've brought to the table here. I could keep going on with you. So, in closing, I want to thank our guest, Jing Xiao, one more time for joining me on today's show. Now, where can people find you on social media? Any Instagram, Twitter, YouTube? Where can they find you?
I have an Instagram account. Anybody can follow me. It's Shaw Brother, but the O is a zero, so the O is a zero. And you guys can find me, and I'll post updates on Chang.
And of course, to all our viewers and our listeners here, we value you so much. So if you have any suggestions for future guests or topics, do reach out to us. And also, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, as well as follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course, YouTube. Once again, Asian Pacific Voices Radio is produced by Asian Culture and Media Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization that empowers our Asian and Pacific Islander communities with a voice through the media arts. So if you're interested in supporting our program, please do visit AsianPacificVoicesRadio.com. Once again, I'm Rasha Goel. Thank you, Jing Xiao, for joining. And make sure you check out his film, Chang Can Dunk, on Disney Plus. Follow him. And please join us next week for another exciting and thought-provoking conversation on Asian Pacific Voices Radio. Take care and see you next time.
Thank you, guys.